The Nigerian Economic Summit Group, NESG, and the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund have tasked stakeholders with interventions for children in need in order to mobilize long-term commitment towards the protection of children at risk and tackle child rights infringement and poverty in Nigeria. The two made the request in Abuja. It's the signing of a memorandum of understanding to strengthen their partnership as they work to find long-term solutions to end child rights violations in areas such as education, social services, child labor, health, and others, as well as to combat the multifaceted and multidimensional poverty affecting children. We're glad to have the chairman of the NESG, Mr. Niyi Yusuf, joining us to discuss further. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. Good morning to you. So, can you talk about the extent of this MOU that was signed between yourselves and UNICEF and how far it goes?
All right, thanks. Last week we were in Abuja to sign the MOU with UNICEF, and I think the rationale behind the MOU really is just for the UNICEF and NESG to work together to avoid an impending doom. By 2050, Nigeria will be top 3 most populous country, well above 400 million folks. Half of those 400 million will be below the age of 19 years, right? Yes. As we speak today, our median age is about 18.1 years. So 100 million plus of us are children. Yeah. And those will be the workforce in 2050. Those will be the consumers in 2050. Those will be the citizens in 2050. So how do we ensure that by 2050 we have productive citizens who are literate, who are healthy, who are educated? How do we ensure that we have talented workforce? How do we ensure that we have consumers who can buy products? Now, if you don't sow the seeds today, by 2050 we're going to have a very poor harvest. And so what we're doing, working with the UNICEF, is to tackle issues of child protection, child poverty. 1 out of every 3 Nigerian children does not finish school. All right? Multidimensional poverty among children is well above 50%. Yeah. Over 60 million of them are what you call child labor. Yeah. And like people say, 20 million of them are out of school. And so those are 20 million future workers. How do we make sure that they can have the right skills, the right tools, the right level of development so that they can become productive citizens? Otherwise, come 2050, what we see now will be a child's play, and there'll be a huge social crisis. And so our work with the UNICEF, our MOU with the UNICEF, provides for a few things. First is that we'll work with UNICEF to review all policies of government that speaks to child labor, child protection, education for children, health, nutrition, diet, etc. That is one. Second, at the NESG, we will set up a child rights observatory that will track certain measures and indices affecting children. We'll work with the federal government administration and the state administration to set up what we call accountability mechanisms. How do we really track things affecting children? If you speak to the average politician today or Nigerian, our priorities will say, okay, it's electricity, it's security, it's water, but nobody talks about the children. If, like UNICEF said, children seem to have been forgotten, yet those are the future leaders. So we'll set up this child rights observatory at the NESG. We'll hold a children poverty summit where we'll call together all stakeholders and say, how do we, in our own enlightened self-interest, work together to turn this children boom into prosperity for all come 2050. And lastly, we'll hope to work with the government to set up cabinet-level directorate that will focus purely on children and children's issues.
You mentioned that 20 million figure. For a while it was 13 million for a while, and now that's been updated. So as part of your initiatives, how do you think we get this number down?
Right. So the out of school children, 20 million thereabout. I think we need to understand the root cause. Most of these kids are out of school for a few reasons. Some of them are the income earners for their parents. Yeah. As of 2016, statistics suggest that we have about 15 million or 16 million thereabout of children of child labor. Yeah. I will argue that that number has since gone up due to Boko Haram, insecurity, and COVID issues. right? Some of them are also due to poverty. Some are due to early girl marriage. We have over 23 million girls who are married in Nigeria today, right? And so a young girl who is married is likely to also have kids that will be roaming the streets. Polygamy is also part of this. Education illiteracy is part of this. So when we understand the root cause, then we can begin to dimension how to tackle them. So when a child is the income earner for the parents, and that's why you see the child, in fact, statistics suggest that the bulk of the child labor is in agric, so they go to farm every day. It's also in what you call domestic chores, right? And so if we find a way to reduce poverty level, we find a way to get their parents to do more of the agriculture, then if you find a way to mechanize agric, then there is less need to get children involved in this. Some of the programs that the government is doing around conditional cash transfer are things that also can be done. Incentive for sending your kids to school. In Osun State, in the past, they give kids meals in school. When you provide meals, when you provide clothing, uniforms, and co, when you make schooling free and affordable and also accessible for all, you will then tend to have more students, more children coming to school. So it's a whole gamut, but we need to really understand the root causes.
Do you think public schools can compete with private schools with respect to, quality of education and so on? What's your take on that, dynamic?
Interesting. I'm a product of both. I went to a private primary school, but I went to a public secondary school. I went to a public university. But all my kids went to private schools, which is a reflection of the reduction in investment in the public education system. So can public schools compete? The answer is yes, with the private system, but there has to be deliberate interventions, there has to be deliberate investment in curriculum, investment in the teaching, in the staff, investment in the use of technology. Technology can standardize teaching, right? Can standardize learning. And so if we make those investments, then chances are that we can raise public school. If you look at Lagos State, for instance, Lagos State has what they call Eco Excel. Edo State has Edo Best. So those are a few states where that deliberate intervention to using technology in school, to improving facilities, and they're beginning to see the results in terms of WAEC scores and etc. So is it possible? It's possible, but it's going to take serious commitment, intervention, investment to get the results.
I want to get your take on how much is being spent on the education budgets as far as thresholds. And we had a guest on not too long ago. I want you to listen to what he said when I asked him this question about how much is being, because the thinking is that, of course, not much is being spent on education as far as education budgets. Says Yomi Fahimi.
Data that tells us how much Nigerians spend on education. There's no data in this country or anywhere in the world. I've said it everywhere I've gone to. People make that mistake. They use the budget of the Ministry of Federal Ministry of Education to say that's the budget for education. That is not correct. The education sector in Nigeria is across over 15 ministries. Let me shock you. All the budgeting for the private, all the budgeting for the federal colleges of education, for the federal cooperative colleges, is not in Ministry of Education. The budget is of the Federal University of Agriculture. It's not in the Ministry of Education. Let me tell you this. The biggest chunk of federal funding for secondary and primary school is in the Ministry of Defense. There are more federal funded primary and secondary school in the budget of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the police than in the Federal Ministry of Education. So there's nobody that knows, and I say this openly, anybody that knows the number should tell us. There is no data to let us know whether Nigeria is spending enough on education or not.
So we always have a data issue, and whichever way you slice it, education is not where it needs to be. So that's really the central point, that I want not to get into a debate as to how much data it is or whether I'm spending more or not. But as far as education spending, you would advocate for more, I take it?
Absolutely. Clearly. I think that there are a few issues to talk about, right? First, of course, is the quantum of the spending. Second is the quality of the spending. Where are we spending this money? Right? If we are spending more on recurrent, on overhead, and less on capital, right? Third is who is spending the money? Yeah. How much of private sector investment or involvement do we have in education, as opposed to state, be it federal or local? I mean, last year we were told over 23,000 Nigerians got admission into universities in UK, and I will argue those guys will spend more than $1 billion every year. So that's $1 billion that could have been invested in the education sector in Nigeria that has now been taken out. Now, good that the NUC has just released some circular that will allow global institutions to come and set up in Nigeria. So hopefully someday we can have an Harvard campus in Nigeria or an MIT campus in Nigeria, so that money does not need to really leave. But I think there's benefit to traveling, there's benefit to creating a network. So we need to focus on that. I think the other bit is, which is also crucial, the entire federal government budget this year is like about 8.2% of our budget.
Yeah.
Now, it's not all of that will be released, clearly. But that is far less than what we spend on servicing debt.
Right.
And so I think we need to really rethink what should government spend money on and what can the private sector spend money on. In my view, government should spend money on health, on education. Let the private sector do the roads. Let the private sector do the rail lines and the railways and the airports. Right? These are things that are used by 1%, 2%, 3% of us. But all of us will use education. All of us will use health. Let government spend money on human capital, education, health, nutrition. And then let the private sector do the hard lifting of power, ports. And what government needs to do is just make sure the environment is enabling, provide the incentives, provide the regulation, and then let private sector capital do that, while you then divert your resources to other things. And I think if we do that, then hopefully we'll get more investment into education, and also will improve the quality of the investment going into education.
Great stuff. Very important memorandum of understanding for children signed by the Nigerian Economic Summit Group and UNICEF. And of course, we're glad to have you, sir, joining us, Mr. Niyi Yusuf, the chairman of the NESG. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.